Sup, y'all? It's me. It's your boy Asmongold, and as a lot of you guys might or might not know, Legion has been out for the better part of a year. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I still don't even believe that. Like, I feel like the expansion's been out maybe 3 or 4 months, but the truth is, guys, it's been double that. And so I wanted to give you, I guess, like my review, my thoughts on the expansion up until now, from release up until now, and just talk about all of the different little features, PvP, PvE, mounts, professions, pet battles, everything that I think that deserves to be talked about and deserves to be discussed. I'm going to have it all in this video. Also, I want to talk about the positives, the negatives, what I think can be improved on, and how I think it should be improved on. Now, obviously, that's all subjective, but of course, this is just my opinion. Now, the reason that I'm kind of making this video is because I've done metagame videos before. I used to do a lot of them, and recently I haven't done too many because I cover a lot of these subjects on my stream pretty regularly, and also on top of that, I feel like I've already said everything that I had to say. But recently, with a lot of the changes for 7.2 and upcoming other changes, I feel like in general, it's good for me to go back and actually summarize everything and also talk about some of the more micro points, like as I said, the pet battles and mounts and everything that I never really got the chance to in previous videos before. Now, one of the reasons that kind of sparked me to make this video, and I chose not to really make a video about just a specific subject because I thought it was kind of silly, is that Blizzard put out their earnings report semi-recently, and they said that Legion was performing slightly better than the previous expansion, which of course would be Warlord to Draenor. Now, I'm not really sure. I believe that wording was intentionally vague, because does that mean the Legion was performing better than Warlord to Draenor at release, at the same point in the expansion cycle, Warlord to Draenor overall, and you don't really know. But one thing that I do know is that I do feel like a lot of people have been having different problems than they had with Warlord to Draenor, but they've also been having a lot of problems with Legion, and I wanted to try to vocalize those problems and give you guys at least like some sort of idea that, you're probably not the only one. So anyway, guys, basically, like, let me just do a TLDR. How do I really feel about the expansion? I feel like the expansion is amazing in a lot of ways. It has such great content, and all of this great content, all of this great stuff has been kind of, I don't really, this is a little strong word, okay? So it might be a little bit theatrical or a little bit, I don't know, I'd be like overplaying it. But I feel like they've kind of been poisoned by some of the internal game systems that kind of create the problems that I feel like Legion really suffers from. So we're talking about the Titan Forging system, the Legendary system, the AP and AK system. While, of course, they always have advantages and disadvantages, I feel like the disadvantages outweigh the advantages. I'm glad that Blizzard is trying new things. I absolutely am. But at the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean that I have to be happy whenever they do something that I don't really think is good. So basically, with the Legendary system, the Titan Forging system, and everything, it's kind of made me feel like a lot of my effort and a lot of my time that I put into the game isn't really being rewarded on the same level that I'm putting it into it. So really, one of the things that I used to really like WoW for is that it was very, very merit-based, right? So if you got up to like High Warlord or Grand Marshal, you got this amazing set of great gear. And now, if you get up to like a high PvP rating, you can get an amazing set of gear, but it might not have the right stats. It just has the right item level. And for PvE, if I finish Naxxramas 40-man or AQ 40 back in vanilla, I mean, you can translate this all the way up until probably really Legion, even in like Warlords of Draenor, if I complete Heroic Hellfire Citadel or Mythic Hellfire Citadel, I'm going to get a lot better rewards out of that than I would have Heroic. And there's no way for somebody to get a better reward from Heroic Hellfire Citadel that I would get from Mythic Hellfire Citadel, all things other created equal, right? So the problem that I see with that is that it kind of devalues the accomplishments of people that want to kind of move forward, and I feel like it doesn't necessarily... Legion has a very, very big problem with motivating players to play more and improve. In a lot of ways, like through like the gambling mechanisms that the game has, it has tried to motivate players to play more through that. But I feel like not only is that vaguely manipulative, but it also has a very, very that behavior extinguishes very quickly. And I feel like that's what's happened with a lot of people. They kind of reach a plateau with their armor where they feel like, okay, I can't get any more Titan Forges unless I do this gear, or I do this raid to get this gear, or I just have to get lucky, and they end up quitting the game. Now, you could argue that people would still reach that same points in WoD or a previous expansion where they couldn't reach the next difficulty, or they just ran out of bosses to kill and they got best in slot. But my argument for you would be that I think it's better for somebody to quit out of completion's sake rather than out of apathy. And I think that's one of the things that's happened in Legion, is with all of the different ways that gear can be better than, higher difficulties and everything like that, and the legendary system, the AP, the AK system, where it's like never over, I feel like it's just created more and more apathy with the game. And I feel like adding things and making them completable, of course, comes with its own problems, but I feel like the problems that creates is a lot more fulfilling than the problems that endless systems like they have right now are creating. So I'll go ahead and I'll talk about that maybe a little bit more at the end of the video, but I'll go into the specific things in Legion that I liked and I didn't like. So the leveling process in Legion, whenever it first started, of course, the first time that you level through any expansion, you're going to love it, right? The odds are. Okay, some people hate leveling, but I enjoy it. Even by the second time, I absolutely hated it. What I don't like about Legion is that Legion leveling is that there's no real way for you to do anything different. And like by the time, whenever they put out heirlooms, which I don't know why they weren't there on release, it's just more time gating. There's literally no value in not having heirlooms on release. I don't really understand that. Wrath of the Lich King had that. What? Did that ruin the expansion? Of course not. It's ridiculous. I don't know why they didn't have heirlooms. They still don't have heirlooms. I'm still mad about that. And that's also a minor thing, and it also feels like they're kind of holding things back, like quality of life changes. They're holding these back and kind of making them features of the expansion whenever they should have just been, baseline, I guess, like, parts of the expansion, if that makes sense. So like flying is kind of like a semi-example of that, but heirlooms is a very good example, and also to a certain degree artifact knowledge is as well, but it's mostly heirlooms as an example. So anyway, Legion leveling, you basically have to go through all 4 of the zones. You probably, if you're doing it with all rested experience, you probably only have to go through 3.5 zones, or maybe just barely, like 3 zones and maybe a few quests into the 4th zone. But the end result is you're probably doing all of the same quests, all of the same times, and there's no real variance as to what you're going to do differently. In Mists of Pandaria, even, you were able to either maybe go to Karasang Wilds, you could stay in Kun-Lai Summit for longer, you could go to Townlong Steppes, you could not even go to Dreadwaste and just level entirely in Townlong Steppes up to level 90. And I felt like there was a lot more variance with how you could level. Of course, Cataclysm was a little bit more formulaic because there was very minimal zones, but if you even look at Warlords of Draenor, I think had, I know that people might not like this, but I feel like Wrath of the Lich King had the best leveling in the game, period. I guess like Vanilla to a certain extent did, but the leveling process from like 70 to 80, I really, really enjoyed that. But Warlords of Draenor, I think, completely revolutionized and reinvented leveling in the best way possible, and it took every positive aspect that the game had and introduced it all into the leveling experience. And leveling in Warlords of Draenor was probably the most fun and most engaging thing that you could do in the expansion, honestly. You had a number of different ways that you could level. You could level through treasures, level through killing rares, level through doing quests. You had your own garrison missions that would give you experience. There were all these other ways that you could do it, and it added and it created a more immersive experience. And I feel like Legion leveling is so formulaic, and everybody's going down the exact same path in the exact same way. It doesn't necessarily make it engaging. Maybe the leveling process is a little bit too long, but most people probably hit 110 from 100 in about 7 to maybe 12 hours, which isn't really too crazy. What I'd like to see them improve on is just increase the experience that you get from killing monsters and doing quests by about 20%, so you can choose which zone you're not going to do. And that's going to give people a little bit more freedom to choose what they do and what they don't want to do. I think that would make it a little bit more interesting. Now, the second thing that I want to talk about is just basic PvE, right? So you got the max level world quests. Now, I've said this before, I think world quests are probably one of the best features that Legion has brought out. In general, I thought world quests were, if I was going to say one thing from each expansion, which would be like the keystone best thing that came out of that expansion. If I was going to say for Legion so far at least, World Quest would be it. I think that they're great, but what I would love to see improved on with World Quests is I'd like to see more World Quests added out in the old world. So imagine, like I use this example in my stream, it's like Red Ridge Mountains, like, oh, it's a Gnoll invasion. Hogger's back for whatever reason, he got out of the stockades, and you gotta go put his ass back in there again. Why? I don't know. But, I mean, they send you back in time to kill Illidan whenever Illidan's the main protagonist in the game now. So, I mean, if you're looking for logic, that's gone already. Anyway, I feel like having different invasions and like there's scaled up gnolls, you know, like Hogger's like as tall as Ragnaros and he's running around and you know he's got his buddy Meatball coming in there and I don't know, it would be fun. And incentivizing stuff like that and maybe adding in world quests or PvP, like you know, some sort of like PvP world PvP quest out there and like Blasted Lands or something would be cool. I'd like to see world quests implemented in the old world and also in like maybe Northrend or I mean Draenor maybe, sure. I mean just any of the other areas in the game to kind of get that World of Warcraft feeling back rather than just the continent of Warcraft, which has kind of been the way that each expansion has gone, right? So you would go to Northrend and you'd spend pretty much all your time in Northrend and Wrath of the Lich King. Cataclysm was a little bit different. Then in Mists of Pandaria, all the time in Pandaria. Then in WoD, all the time in Draenor. So I would like to see Legion use World Quest to kind of spread players out and have players experiencing more of the game rather than just the new continents. I feel like that would be more fulfilling for a lot of people. But I feel like World Quests in a lot of ways are very good addition to the game. Probably one of the best additions to the game that we've had in a long time. Now, the basic quests, like the Suramar quest lines, I really, really like those. It kind of went on maybe a little bit too long, but I'm also not one of the people that really gets into the lore in the same way that others are. So I can see where some people that do really enjoy that stuff would really, really enjoy the Suramar quest line. The Broken Shore quest line, I feel the same way towards that to a degree, but the problem is that that's parceled out in like these little 5 or 10 minute segments every single week. The people that are playing the game right now are probably not going to have that great. They're probably not going to have that great of an experience because they're only playing 10% of it every single week, and so you're waiting for the week to roll over. Oh wow! I wonder what cool new story we have today. Farm 100 marks of the Centnex. You know. Whoa, boy! Wow. You know, fuck that. And so it's not really a big surprise that people don't really like that as much. But to me, I feel like if people start the game later on and they go through the whole Broken Shore questline, it's not going to be even close to how good the Suramar questline was. But it might be, you know, at least on the same, I don't know, the same world, if that makes sense. So those are okay, but I'd like to also see like basic, like the old style daily quests return, like in the Broken Shore or maybe in Suramar or in Dalaran. I feel like some people like the idea of talking to a quest giver, talking to that person, them telling you what to do, and then going and doing it, rather than just going to a zone and then just killing the mobs there and then getting a reward. So I'd like to see maybe a few actual legitimate daily quests added back into the game in the same facility that we used to have in like Eye of Gul'danis or the Molten Front or something like that. Now, for the dungeons, I feel like the Mythic Plus system has worked very well to a certain degree. Whenever they change the system to basically make it reward less rewards, and also they get rid of the depletion mechanic, I'm going to be curious to see how many people continue playing it as much as they are now. But all that being said, I feel like the dungeons in Legion, if there were any dungeons that I would like to do over and over and over again, I feel like the Legion dungeons are probably some of the main ones that I would enjoy. I really enjoy doing, I feel like Court of Stars is probably the most dynamic instance that they've made, with all the different things that you can do with the professions, and different things that different classes can do, turning off the orb, poisoning the vial, setting up the trap, and, you know, being able to use Spectral Sight to see, like, the, the Dreadlord inside the little jeweled estate. And all of those things really make it feel like you're actually contributing in a unique way with your class and your character. And so I'd like to see them add more stuff like that that's similar to Court of Stars into other instances as well. But I don't really know how much of that we'll see, because that can make it to where there's like one best spec or best class or best profession, which is something that they've tried to stray away from. Now, Mythic Plus to a certain degree, as I also feel, has led to at least a certain degree of burnout. And also with that burnout, because you're just doing the same dungeons over and over and over, but whenever you compare that to previous expansions, I don't really see how that would be that bad of a thing, because anybody that's going to burn themselves out doing Mythic Plus dungeons probably just stop playing the game anyway, because there was no content left for them to do, assuming that they can't raid instead. What I'd like to see them do also for Mythic Plus dungeons is that ever since probably challenge modes were introduced in Mists of Pandaria, the entire paradigm of challenge and dungeon content has been time oriented. So back in Burning Crusade, you had the heroics from Burning Crusade, very, very difficult, very hard to do, and obviously like you could do them fast if you were in a really good group, but you had to crowd control different mobs, you had to do different strategies for different bosses, and I feel like a lot of people, they don't really have 15 minutes, 20 minutes to just sit down and have completely uninterrupted play. And there's a number of reasons for that. They could have kids, they could have their friends come over, and it just really kind of derails the whole dungeon whenever anybody has to go AFK at all. So what I'd like to see them do is, as an alternative to having the Mythic Plus dungeons have 3 affixes, I'd like to see them have a 4th affix, adding in a 4th affix in place of the timer. So as an example, you would have, past 10, I guess Mythic Plus Dungeons 10 and above either have Fortified or Tyrannical ads, and I would like to see maybe like Tyrannical added in on Fortified weeks if you wanted to do the dungeon without a timer, and then maybe if you completed it all, and it doesn't matter what the time that takes you to complete it in, that would allow you to upgrade the key. Now, I don't really think that's going to make that big of a deal, because of course you'd have separate progression paths for each different type. You have the time dungeons and then also the people that are just doing it with all 4 affixes. So again, basically to recap, I would just want to have it to where there were the 2 normal affixes, and then instead of having Tyrannical or Fortified, you'd have both. And obviously this is just an idea I have in my head, and maybe there's a better way of doing it, but the idea would be to make a dungeon that's also more challenging than the time dungeon, that gives the same rewards, but doesn't have a time limit. So they have a certain degree of, of equality, I guess, or, I don't know, of parity. But at the same time, the untimed one is, of course, going to be harder. So that would allow groups that want to be AFK, that want to take things slower, that want to actually push to the very, very highest level without having to worry about a timer, still be able to do something that isn't as stressful as having to do a Mythic Plus dungeon within a time limit. So I'd really like to see that happen. Also, with raids, so raids, like as a lot of you guys know, I've been a Mythic Raider for a very long time. I've cleared Mythic Emerald Nightmare, Mythic TOV, gotten the Chosen, killed Mythic Gul'dan. I've done plenty of that stuff. And I would say that really raids in WoW have only really gotten better. Now, I do want to preface that also with saying that I feel like Mythic Nighthold, for the rewards that it gave, wasn't really enticing enough for a lot of players to move up from it. Now, a lot of people, like whenever I talk about the Titan Forging system, they think that, oh, well, you just think that everybody's going to get 925 gear from LFR. No, of course not. I mean, of course that happens as well, but it's very, very rare. What I really am worried about is players that go into Heroic, and they get maybe a couple of upgrades from Heroic, and then Heroic gear is replacing Mythic gear. Not LFR gear replacing Mythic gear. Of course that can happen, but it's very unlikely. It's basically people feeling like they're not really being rewarded for moving up in that extra difficulty. And I feel like Mythic Nighthold, with how tightly tuned it was, with how brutal the requirements were, especially whenever you look at like pre-nerf Gul'dan, pre-nerf Star Augur, even Croesus, you're going to have 54 traits at that point. And, for a lot of people, moving up into that next level isn't really that compelling, just to get maybe a different color transmog and maybe, in a lot of ways, worse gear than they already had. So I feel like they really have a big challenge on their hands trying to incentivize these Mythic raids. Personally, I'd like to see Mythic raids not have a cap with Titan Forging, or actually be at the cap for Titan Forging. So build Titan Forging around it being the absolute cap that drops from Mythic Plus, so everything can Titan Forge up to like Mythic level, but Mythic level is the ceiling for all the gear to go to. I would like that, or I would also like for you to be able to use, like, let's say Draft of Souls is a trinket for warriors. Everybody wants this trinket, And obviously, if you get like a really shitty draft of souls and another one drops, that's pretty much just DE'd. I'd like to be able to use like the Obliterum Forge to like obliterate a draft of souls into like some sort of reagent or essence that you can apply to an existing draft of souls that would upgrade that item up to the max Titan forging level, or if it's not already at mythic, up to the next level of difficulty. So you could upgrade it up to mythic level, and then if you got mythic draft of souls, you could upgrade it all the way up to like 925. So that would solve a lot of problems. I think that would allow it to where players were not necessarily had their character's power defined by RNG, where it was influenced by RNG but it wasn't defined, and it would also give people a reason to go back in the past, like, and actually level up and do these raids and level up their armor. And it'll keep those old raids a lot more relevant. Now, there are a number of other reasons or ways that they could do this with like item upgrades, etc. But I feel like melting down one item to augment an existing item of the same type to upgrade that existing item's item level would be an interesting solution to players feeling like they're kind of defined by Titan Forging RNG. So I'd really like to see that happen. Now, for the specific raids, I thought Emerald Nightmare was complete shit. In a way, I liked Emerald Nightmare. I didn't really like the theme a lot. I liked Il'gynoth. I kind of liked Xavius. It was okay. And the rest of them, Dragons of Nightmare, I thought Mythic Dragons of Nightmare was cool. But besides that, I didn't really give much of a fuck about Emerald Nightmare. It could have been a lot cooler than it was. And Cenarius was interesting. Nithindria I didn't like. Ursoc I didn't like. Oh my god, I'm getting a million messages. Sorry about this, guys. Turn off my phone. Anyway, I just feel like Emerald Nightmare wasn't really that great of a raid. Trial of Valor I thought was amazing. Now, I know a lot of people are going to just completely shit on me for that, but I feel like Trial of Valor was probably one of the best raids that they've ever made in a lot of different ways. I feel like it incorporated the outdoor elements of going into Helya's domain in a very, very good way and a very immersive way. Also, like killing Odin and fighting the Odin fight, I thought that was interesting. And each fight had its own like different theme to it. And Helya, I thought was an amazing fight, very, very well designed. Some people don't like it a lot, but for me, I just thought it was a very interesting fight, and it was definitely very, I guess it was kind of dynamic. And also, there were just so many different things going on. I really enjoyed it. Now, for Nighthold, I feel like Nighthold as a raid was great. For the bosses, I like Star Augur. Obviously, like the aesthetics of Star Augur was amazing. But the only fight that I really enjoyed doing was Gul'dan. Trilliax, Chromatic Anomaly, Scorpion, who gives a fuck. Spellblade was okay. I didn't really like the orb mechanic and the way that you charge at certain people with orbs. I didn't like that at all. Tichondrius, not really a big fan of having to have like specific people with immunities to soak. I thought that was silly. Botanist, I didn't like. One of the things that I don't like in a lot of fights is where if you make a mistake in like minute 1 or minute 2 of the fight, it's going to hurt you in like minute 7 or minute 8 of the fight. And I can see obviously there are reasons for that, but I don't really feel like Botanist was a very fun fight to progress on, and I think that a lot of guilds probably died on Botanist. Star Augur is like one of those fights, and I'm talking about, of course, on Mythic. On Heroic, I don't know. I mean, Heroic Botanist was fine, but on Mythic, I really didn't like the Star Augur Grand Trine mechanic, because it was like if one person made a mistake, the entire raid wiped. And it's just very, very frustrating, very annoying, and I just didn't really feel like it was fun, and it was just frustrating, annoying, and just, I didn't like it. I don't think anybody did. But Elisand, I kind of expect it to be more of an interesting fight, but it was basically just trying to make sure that you stay alive long enough for your raid group not to die from rings. Gul'dan, I feel like, was much more dynamic. You could choose when you were going to use heroism. You could even use heroism twice. You had the Demon Within phase that you had no idea was going to happen. And I just feel like they incorporated a lot of the old Illidan mechanics, like the parasites and stuff like that. I feel like they incorporated those in a very good way. So I feel like Gul'dan was a great fight, and I'd like to see more fights like that in Tomb of Sargeras. But that's basically the way that I feel about raids. And I don't really know entirely like if Tomb of Sargeras is going to be better. I haven't really done a lot of PvP or PTR testing. but I definitely hope that it is, especially it's not really quite as tightly tuned. Now, for PvP, I know a lot of people don't really care about PvP in Legion, and I think that one of the reasons for that is that basically you've always got, like, in an MMO PvP, you've got kind of like two ends of a spectrum. You've got fairness and you've got fun. And I feel like what they've done is that back in the day, you would get like a new cool weapon, and you would be able to use that weapon and take it directly into a battleground and just kick ass with that weapon. Well, that's no longer a thing. You don't really get to have, Draft of Souls in PvP. All you get is you get an item that increases your stats by a very, very small margin. So the progression that you have in PvP right now is just so minimal, it's basically non-existent. And I feel like the way that they've done the template system has not really been rewarding for a lot of players. You don't really feel good whenever you get new gear for PvP. It's just like, oh great, now I'm slightly more powerful. Because the increases and the power increases in PvP are so incremental, I feel like a lot of players don't think that they're getting any sort of power increase. And because there's no gear progression in PvP, and also because classes are going to be a little bit unbalanced, it's like always been a rock, paper, scissors game. And in the past, you were able to use a different build, you were able to use different talents, and I guess you can still do that now, but you're able to get better gear. And so, even if you can't beat a mage that's on the same gear level as you can maybe beat a mage that has less gear than you. And now, there's no real sense of having more gear or less gear, everybody's pretty much on the same level. And putting everybody on the same level has its advantages, but I do feel like it was more important for people to get that feeling of, oh wow, I got this cool new weapon, I want to take it into a battleground and really kill people. And I think that this isn't really an elitist idea. Almost everybody got to have this experience. Even in Burning Crusade, you could go 0 and 10 and still get your arena points for the week, save those up, and buy the Merciless Gladiator's Greatsword halfway through the season. So it's not like you weren't able to have that feeling, or you could take PvE gear in there at any time. And it's not like you weren't able to have this feeling and still be able to feel like, oh wow, I'm a badass at least a few times. And the odds are, for people that played back then, you can probably remember the exact item that you got that made you feel that way. And now it's like, what was the last piece of PvP gear that you got now? You probably don't even remember. And I don't really think that the RNG boxes and the RNG gear is an issue as much as people might think that it is. But I also think that there should be PvP vendors, and one thing that they've done in 7.2 that I think was a really, really good solution was add a vendor that you could break down gear. Will basically allow you to obliterate PvP gear, and then after you get enough of the Obliterum essences, you're able to buy a piece of the same, of like any piece actually, of the same like type. So like elite gear versus normal mode gear, you're able to buy that, and I think that was a very good solution, and definitely a step in the right direction of allowing people to offset their RNG. So I feel like the template system was a really good, what do you call it? Like a really good, I don't know, like test, like experiment. But I'd like to see gear actually matter in PvP again. And I feel like even whenever you don't actually get to be the guy that fucking one-shots somebody with the new sword, it's kind of like the thing. It's like the. I think I used this example. It's like the Sith, in Star Wars. It's like you've got the master and you've got the apprentice. And the master wields the power and the apprentice craves the power. And the master is the dude with like fucking the Grand Marshal's greatsword, and the apprentice is the guy with the ice barb spear or the unstoppable force. And getting your ass beat over and over and over motivates some players to actually play a lot more and get better. Not everybody, of course. But I feel like you can't make everybody happy. And I feel like this was a more compelling and a more engaging and a more rewarding scenario than just putting everybody on kind of a pseudo even playing field with minor advantages going back and forth. I feel like also having Concordance scale indefinitely in rated PvP is probably a bad idea. I'd like if they scaled it, or they, not scaled it, but they kind of baselined it at the 2000 stat baseline rather than just allowing it to scale infinitely through PvP. But I do want to see like gear matter a little bit more in PvP than it does now. For random battlegrounds, it's kind of the same thing. I feel like you can't really go in there and just completely kick ass in the same way that you used to, and I'd really like to see that come back into the game. I know that's kind of an unpopular opinion, but I feel like a lot of people that played back in and even play now really enjoyed that feeling, and they enjoyed the idea of getting better gear and everything. if people wanted to play on an even playing field, I think that there are already a lot of games that facilitate that experience a lot better. One minor problem that I do have with PvP, and I think this is something that you can especially see in like the tournaments and all, is that the way that defensive cooldowns and offensive cooldowns are used and traded in a very formulaic manner. So you have somebody use offensive cooldowns, and then you use defensive cooldowns to negate the offensive cooldowns. And what I'd really like to see them do, and this is like, because like fights go on to like 40 or 50% dampening, and for an audience, I don't really feel, and even for a player, I don't really feel like that's engaging. I think like an arena match should last between 3 and 7 minutes, okay? If it goes on to like 10 minutes in an arena match, that's insane. And I don't really want to see any more of that. I feel like dampening is like an example and an acknowledgement of the fact that the game is not really balanced in the best way for PvP. What I'd like to see happen is I'd like to see cooldowns, like offensive cooldowns, kind of toned down, and I'd like to see consistent, just like your basic damage without any cooldowns turned up. I feel like Wrath of the Lich King was probably the best points between the two. Wrath of the Lich King PvP had the best pace, that I would say. Now, also going into some of the more minor things. Professions, I think, have been okay. The profession quest lines, I think, can get a little bit long, and then once you finish the entire quest line, you get something that doesn't really matter. And I think that making professions matter a little bit more, because they originally stopped this in Warroad to Draenor. And the reason for that is because in Mists of Pandaria, every single person had blacksmithing and engineering, because they were the two top DPS enchants, or professions, that you could use to enchant your weapons. Or armor, actually. Yeah, you use them like to get like extra sockets in like your gloves and your bracers, and then engineering gave you a glove enchant that made you do more damage. So I'd like to see professions matter a little bit more. I'd like to see professions be able to craft actual raid level gear. I think that would be interesting. And I'd also just like to see professions be an alternate form of progression. In Vanilla and Burning Crusade especially, there were a lot of very, very good items that you could craft with professions. I'm talking about like the Lionheart Helm, of course all of the resistance gear. You had, I think like there were tons of different patterns that you could get at level 70, like the Mage Blade or Sage Blade, the Felsteel Longblade, and all these items that you could craft. And then you of course had Storm Herald and things that were exclusive to blacksmiths. And all of those things made it feel like you were a blacksmith, and it made it feel like your profession had meaning and it had significance. And in the pursuit of making things equal and fair, I think Blizzard has taken away the significance of a lot of the different little things that you can do in the game. So like professions, gear in PvP, the Titan forging, all of that stuff has been kind of subverted. Has kind of subverted the idea of like significance and real like character progression, which I think a lot of people are missing out on. Reputations in Legion, not that good. Obviously you have the reputations in the game, you have the Paragon boxes. I like the Paragon boxes. I thought I wouldn't, but I actually think that they're a really good feature, and I don't really want to see them added too much more, and I think it really depends on what the drop rate of the items that come out of the Paragon boxes are. But at the current rate, I feel like the drop rates are fair, and the Paragon boxes were definitely a successful addition. But I'd like to see Reputation play a bigger part, and also for Reputation not just to be doing world quests in this general area around this faction's NPCs. I just feel like if they had other factions that you could actually work towards, you had a number of those even in... I guess like WoD had even worse reputations, but in Mists of Pandaria you had all these crazy different reputations like the Calaxy, and you could only unlock, I think, the Golden Lotus if you got honored with another reputation, and that kind of stuff was very interesting. And by the time that you got exalted, one thing that was stupid is that you had to have actually spend Valor gear to buy the items, but there were a number of things that you could still get out of that out of those reputations that were meaningful. And especially if you go back to like Wrath of the Lich King reputations, and Burning Crusade, and especially Vanilla, you could see a lot of the different reputations at Exalted or even Revered. You could get a certain item that was unique and also very powerful if you farmed that reputation a lot. So it gave players something that they can grind that also has a very, very tangible progression path that also has an important reward at the end. So I'd really like to see reputations be a little bit more, substantial, and also I'd like to see them matter a little bit more and have rewards that aren't basically just a 850 pair of leggings. I think that's what you get from the Valajar. It's completely pathetic. Pet battles. Pet battles. Now, I know a lot of people don't give a shit about this, but I do feel like they've innovated pet battles more than almost anything else in Legion. They've added a lot of new achievements into pet battles. They've added a lot of other things into pet battles, like the dungeons and everything. And pet battles have taken leaps and bounds in Legion. And whoever is designing the pet battle stuff is doing a great job. Please keep it up. The achievements for having to beat all the trainers with certain types of pets makes people want to level and build the best combinations of those pets. And just putting that stuff out there for the people that enjoy it, I feel like has been very, very positive. And I think that pet battles have been done in a perfect manner for Legion, and I hope it continues. The mounts in the game, mounts are good. I do feel like they should have made the Stormdrakes Gladiator exclusive. This is coming from somebody who's never gotten Gladiator. I do feel like making something that is exclusive like that makes it to where if you see a Stormdrake in the area, it's like, oh shit, that's a fucking Gladiator mount. Now, whenever everybody has just a different color of Stormdrake or a different color of Moose, it takes away from the exclusivity and the perceived value of each different mount. Whenever you stand out, that has a lot of value to people. And many of the people that have value, or I guess like perceive value through standing out, are also the ones that are the most motivated to try to stand out themselves. So I feel like, in a certain degree, I'd like to see more unique mounts from very, very hard to get places. Now, they also had like the Mind Riddler's Worm, which I thought was really cool. Now, I'd love to see a mount like that from a super, super hard boss or something like Ganathus, like that world, like pseudo-world boss in Mists of Pandaria. But I feel like things like that and the Cosmoth mount, the best thing about that is all the kind of like the hype that's generated around it. So you have people talking like, oh, what do these crystals do for the long-forgotten Hippogriff? What are these little orbs for the Cosmoth? What are these, I don't even remember, what did you even need to do for the Mind Riddler's Worm? I think you had to click things or something like that. And, getting people talking and building that community and kind of developing that and creating a buzz in the extended community of the game, I think even though those mounts are really unique and they're just kind of given out when they're really easy, I think that just because they're so interesting and it's so cool to finally like, oh my god, people finally found this mount, I feel like that feeling and that amount of hype is more valuable than just having one more hard to get mount in the game, because it just creates the World of Warcraft and it gets people like kind of engaged in the game and hyped up for the game whenever it's not a new patch, it's not a new expansion. And it also gives people a sense of wonder back to the game. Like in vanilla, you'd always like kind of be curious. Like people were thinking that you need to fish for the Ashbringer under a bridge in I think Eastern Plaguelands or something like that. And it's like, because people didn't really have Thoughtbot or anything like that, or they did, but it sucked. You didn't have Wildhead. You didn't have your boy Asmongold on YouTube here telling you how to get everything in a game. There was much more of a sense of expansiveness of the game, and now that's much less the case. And so seeing things like the Cosmoth orbs and the Mind Riddler's Worm, or the Riddler's Mind Worm, I think that's what it's called, kind of brings back that same feeling. So I think it's definitely a positive. The last thing I want to talk about are the systems in the game that have been added into Legion, which is basically the Titan Forging and Legendaries and the AP and the AK. As Titan Forging, I think the Titan Forging would be okay if there was caps to it and it couldn't like exceed the next difficulty, and also you had a way to kind of offset Titan Forging by being able to farm up like Valor points, farm up other gear and disenchant it to like combine it to upgrade current items. Just some way to offset RNG. I don't like it if somebody just gets a better piece of gear than I do and there's nothing I can do about it. I can never get a better piece of gear than that except by just getting really, really lucky. It just gives me a bad feeling, but maybe that's just me. Legendaries have been a terrible system ever since their inception. Whenever they said you were able to target them, I thought it would be okay, but now it's just basically another barrier to playing alts, and it's also just something that's another element of frustration between allowing players to compete with each other, and I think that it's only been negative towards like the high-end community of raiding, and that's trickled down into even Mythic Plus groups and stuff like that. some of the legendaries just give you such a big power increase. And if you're a very, very serious player like myself and you play all the time, I have every single Fury legendary except for one. So, of course, it's not a big deal for me to get all of them, and it doesn't really matter. But the odds are that most people don't get paid to play the game, and so they might only have 3 or 4 or 5 legendaries, and in that pool of 3 or 4 or 5 legendaries, they might not even have their best in slot ones. So, I mean, the difference between like the best in slot compared to the worst in slot legendaries for some classes and specs is huge, and I feel like it makes a person feel really bad whenever their character's power is defined by getting lucky or not getting lucky. It just doesn't really, it doesn't make somebody feel good. And also whenever they get the legendary or they get that really high level Titan Forge, there's nothing, like you don't really feel like, oh my god, this is fucking awesome, wow. And maybe if you do, it's just for a few minutes. You don't really, you're being given rewards without being given the sense of being rewarded, right? And it's like that rewarding experience, you can't really give that to somebody. They have to give it to themselves. And you can't just have that by getting lucky. And to a certain degree you can. Obviously it's really cool whenever you get a BOE drop or something. But after a while, I think that really goes away pretty fast, especially whenever you're kind of hoping to get this item. And if you know if you don't, then you're going to get sat in your raid team, or somebody else is going to outperform you, or you're kind of just at this arbitrary disadvantage. So I think because of that, the legendary system has been a complete failure. Whoever thought of it, I'm not going to say that. Titan Forging, basically the same thing, but to a lesser extent. AP and AK, I think artifact knowledge at this point should be made account wide. I think also artifact power should have a certain cap. I know that what Blizzard's idea is so people don't feel like they're compelled to just play forever. But I feel like if Concordance had a more tangible cap, like maybe only 20 traits instead of 50, and it didn't scale up to 200 trillion, it would be a little bit more engaging for me, because as a completionist, I like to actually be done with the game. And being able to finish my weapon and get 54 traits back in Emerald Nightmare was a really, really rewarding experience for me. So it's disappointing to know that that won't come back until maybe the next expansion. Now, also, another thing that I do want to talk about, the last thing I want to say, is that I think a big problem with Legion is that basically all content that you do is on like a flat level. So as soon as you hit 110, you are basically able to access all of the content in the entire game within a week. So from hitting 110, you're going to kill Gul'dan probably within that raid lockout. And after that, you're just doing harder and harder difficulties. But there's nothing that you really move on to. You're just doing the same things over and over and over again. And I feel like Blizzard is a little bit afraid to add content that's exclusive, because people feel like because they're paying for the game that they should be able to see all of the content. Personally, I don't really think that's the best way to create a game. Apparently Blizzard disagrees with me, but that's the way that I feel. And I hope that Blizzard understands where a lot of people are coming from, and I hope also that Blizzard understands that a lot of people probably don't get that same sense of progression by going from one difficulty to another rather than going from one raid to another. And so all the dungeons, all the raids, and everything is accessible within maybe 24 hours of play at the max level. And at that point, you don't really feel like you're, I don't know, it just doesn't really feel like an MMO. It's like you've already done everything. So like all that's left to do is just do things on harder difficulties. And I feel like that only appeals to a very small subset of the community that actually cares about, you know, power progression and gear and actually playing on the hardest difficulty and all of that. And for the whole casual audience, I don't really feel like it gives them a rewarding and a compelling and a satisfying experience. But anyway, guys, that's pretty much all I've got. That is my review of Legion. In general, I'll recap basically not everything. Don't worry, this video is already way too long. Basically, I feel like it's a good expansion. A lot of really good things added into the expansion, but there are a few systems in the game, namely the Titan Forging Legendary system, that have kind of poisoned the expansion for a lot of people, and I'd really like to see those systems reimagined and redesigned for the next expansion. And I think if they did that, that would be the first step towards making the game a lot more rewarding and making people feel a lot more rewarded and feel like they're not wasting their time. So that's pretty much how I feel. I'd be very, very curious to hear how you guys feel about Legion so far. Are you still playing? If not, why? If you are still playing, why are you still playing? I really want to know, because I make these videos all the time, and it also helps me understand what my audience is doing. And the more of these videos that I make, and the more that we talk about this, the more that I understand you guys, and the easier it is for me to make videos to make you guys happy. So that's pretty much all I've got. Thanks a lot for watching, and like, comment, and subscribe.